At 18, my sister and I were handed an eviction notice and $5. What we bought with that money wasn't just a diner. It was a second chance we never knew we were fighting for. This is the story of how a rusty key and a forgotten promise changed everything. If you've ever felt lost and wondered where to start over, stick with me. Hit that subscribe button because this story is for you. The day it all ended was cold for a Tuesday in May. A damp, persistent chill had seeped into the bones of our apartment building, a tired brick block that always smelled of damp laundry and someone else's cooking. The eviction notice wasn't a surprise, not really. We'd seen the registered letters piling up, the ones our stepfather, Don, would sweep into the trash with a grunt. For 2 years since Mom died, we'd been living on borrowed time, 2 ghosts in a house that had stopped being a home the moment her breath did. My sister Maya was 18 for exactly 3 months. I had turned 18 2 days before. The timing was, Don said with a shrug, just a matter of legal convenience. He wasn't legally responsible for us anymore. The lock on the door clicked shut behind us with a sound of metallic finality, a sound that sliced through the thin fabric of our lives and severed us from the only world we knew. We stood on the cracked pavement, me clutching a single garbage bag filled with a panicked collection of yearbooks, 2 sweaters, and a framed photo of our mom, and Maya holding a similar bag, her jaw set so tight I thought it might crack. Don hadn't even had the decency to look us in the eye. He just taped a $5 bill to the door. For the bus, the note scrawled on the back of a receipt said, "We didn't take the bus. We walked to our car, a 20-year-old sedan we called the Biscuit, a wheezing, rust-pocked machine Mom had left us. It was the only thing in the world that was truly ours." We threw our bags in the back seat, the vinyl cool and cracked against the plastic. For a long time we just sat there, the engine off, the silence inside the car, a roaring vacuum. The sky was the color of dishwater. I watched a plastic bag drift across the parking lot, a sad, urban tumbleweed. Every plan I'd ever half-formed, community college, maybe a job at the bookstore, evaporated into that gray air. We were untethered, floating. Maya was the first to speak, her voice low and rough. "Well," she said, not looking at me, "that's that." She unfolded the $5 bill, smoothing it out on her knee. The paper was worn, soft as old cloth. It looked impossibly small, an insultingly tiny consolation prize for the complete implosion of our world. We had a quarter tank of gas, about $47 in a joint savings account we'd been building since we were 16, and this $5 bill. We were adrift on a vast, indifferent ocean, and this was our pathetic little life raft. That first night we slept in the car, parked in the far corner of a 24-hour supermarket lot. The fluorescent lights of the store cast a sickly, humming glow that gave the illusion of daylight, of safety. But it was a lie. Every passing car made my heart hammer against my ribs. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The windows fogged up with our breath, trapping us in a cold, damp bubble. Maya feigned sleep, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the rigid line of her back. I stayed awake, tracing patterns on the condensed moisture of the window, watching the lonely procession of night shift workers and insomniacs come and go. I thought about Mom. I wondered if she could see us, and if she was ashamed. Or maybe she was just sad. The grief I'd kept packed down for 2 years felt like it was expanding in my chest, a cold, heavy presence that made it hard to breathe. I didn't cry. I felt too numb for tears, too hollowed out. It was a strange kind of freedom, the kind that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The world had taken everything, and in a way, that meant it had no more power over us. We had the car, we had each other. We had $5. It wasn't much, but as the fake dawn began to streak the sky with shades of bruised purple and gray, I decided it would have to be enough. It was the first day of the rest of our lives, whether we wanted it to be or not. We spent the next day at the public library, not for the books, but for the free internet and the warmth. While I pretended to read, my mind a blank static, Maya was a woman on a mission. She hunched over one of the ancient desktop computers, her brow furrowed in concentration, the rhythmic click-clack of the keyboard the only sound in our small corner of the world. She scrolled through job listings, apartment shares, roommate requests, her face growing grimmer with each click. Everything required a deposit, a reference, a credit check, a proof of income. We were ghosts in the system, with no history and no anchor. We had nothing. I watched her shoulders slump, the flicker of hope in her eyes dimming to a resigned ember. I felt a surge of useless anger. We were good kids. We'd stayed out of trouble, got decent grades. We'd nursed our mom through 2 years of sickness without a single complaint. Didn't that count for anything? Apparently not. The world just saw 2 18-year-olds with no address and no money. We were a liability. After hours of fruitless searching, Maya leaned back in the squeaky chair and sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice tight with unshed tears. "There's nothing, Leo, nothing we can do." I wanted to comfort her, to say something hopeful, but the words wouldn't come. Hope felt like a foreign language. It was then that she saw it. She had strayed from the usual job sites, diving into the strange, chaotic wilderness of online classifieds, the digital equivalent of a dusty junk shop. And there it was, nestled between ads for used lawnmowers and someone seeking a lost parrot. The listing was so bizarre, so stark, that it seemed like a joke or a typo. The headline read, "For sale, business opportunity." The description was just 2 lines. Roadside diner, as is, where is. Price, $5. There was no photo, just an address in a town I'd never heard of, a place called Havenwood, about 3 hours north. $5, Maya breathed, her finger hovering over the mouse. "Leo, look." I leaned in, squinting at the screen. It had to be a scam, a lure for some kind of crime. "No way," I said. "That can't be real. It's probably $1 a year lease with $1 million buyout, or it's condemned, or it's a front for a cult." "Probably," she agreed, but she didn't click away. She kept staring at the ad, a strange light dawning in her eyes. It was the frantic, desperate light of someone with no other options. "But what if it's not?" she said, turning to me. "What if it's real? We have $5, Leo. Don't's $5. It feels, I don't know, like a sign." It was insane. It was the single most illogical, reckless idea I had ever heard. To take our last real money, use our last fumes of gas, and drive 3 hours into the middle of nowhere on the promise of a $5 diner. But then I looked at my sister's face. The exhaustion was still there, etched into the pale skin under her eyes, but it was mixed with something else now. A spark, a wild, improbable flicker of hope. And I realized that the logical, sensible options had all run out. We were already at the bottom. The worst that could happen was that we'd lose $5 and end up stranded in a different part of the state. The best that could happen, I couldn't even imagine it. "Okay," I said, the word feeling strange and momentous in my mouth. "Okay, let's go buy a diner." The decision hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifying. Maya printed the ad, the ink bleeding slightly on the cheap library paper. We walked out into the afternoon glare, the city seeming louder, harsher than before. The journey to Havenwood felt like a pilgrimage to an unknown country. The biscuit, as if sensing the gravity of our mission, rattled and coughed more than usual. The familiar gray landscape of the city slowly dissolved in the rearview mirror, replaced by the sprawling, anonymous suburbs, and then, finally, by the wide-open green and brown of the countryside. The highway stretched out before us, a long asphalt ribbon winding through rolling hills and patches of dense forest. I watched the mileage signs for Havenwood tick down, my stomach churning with a cocktail of fear and a strange, unfamiliar excitement. We didn't talk much. There was nothing to say. We were putting all our faith in a digital ghost, a classified ad that was almost certainly a cruel joke. The quarter tank of gas became an eighth of a tank. The needle hovered precariously over the red line. Maya drove with a fierce, white-knuckled focus, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if she could will the car to keep going. I held Don's $5 bill in my hand. It was our ticket, our offering, our last pathetic prayer. As we passed a sign that read, "Havenwood, 10 miles," the car began to sputter. "No, no, no," Maya chanted under her breath, pumping the gas pedal. The engine coughed, choked, and then died. We rolled to a silent stop on the shoulder of the empty 2-lane road. For a moment we just sat there, the silence deafening after the constant rattle of the engine. We were stranded. It was exactly the disaster I had feared. I was about to say, "I told you so," but the look on Maya's face stopped me. It wasn't defeat. It was a kind of furious determination. "We're walking," she said, and before I could argue, she was out of the car, grabbing her bag from the back. I followed suit, my own bag feeling impossibly heavy. We locked the car, a pointless gesture on a deserted road, and started walking. The address from the ad was for a place on the Old Ridge Highway, and according to the map on Maya's phone, we were on it. We just had to walk for another 2 miles. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. It was beautiful, but the beauty felt mocking, a postcard from a world we didn't belong to. We walked in silence, the crunch of our sneakers on the gravel shoulder the only sound. And then we saw it. At a lonely crossroads where the old highway met a smaller, unnamed road, stood a building. It was silhouetted against the dying sun, a low, long shape with a swooping roofline. A single word was visible on the rusted sign that hung precariously from a metal pole. Starlight. It was the diner. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. The building was a wreck, a skeletal carcass picked clean by time and neglect. The chrome trim that might have once gleamed was now a pockmarked, rust-streaked mess. The large plate-glass windows were clouded with years of grime, and one was spiderwebbed with a massive crack. The paint, once probably a cheerful white and red, had peeled away to reveal rotting wood and stained metal underneath. Weeds, thick as my wrist, grew up through the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, reclaiming the space for nature. The whole place sagged, as if exhausted, as if it had given up long ago. My heart sank. This wasn't a business opportunity. It was a ruin. "Maya," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "This is—" "I know," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She didn't look disappointed. She looked focused. She walked towards it, her steps sure and steady, as if approaching a sacred place. I followed her, my feet dragging. There was a smaller sign taped to the inside of the glass door, the paper yellowed and curled at the edges. It listed a name, Arthur Pendleton, and a phone number. "He's a lawyer," Maya said, pointing to the fine print. "The trustee." She pulled out her phone. The battery was at 3%. She dialed the number, her fingers trembling slightly. A man answered on the second ring, his voice dry and crackly, like old paper. Maya explained who we were, that we were here about the ad. There was a long pause on the other end. "You're actually here?" the man, Mr. Pendleton, finally said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "I've had that ad up for a year. I thought it was a lost cause." He told us to wait. He was in town, only a few minutes away. We waited as the last of the light bled from the sky, leaving the world in shades of deep blue and purple. The air grew colder. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. This was it, the final humiliating punchline to the joke of our lives. A few minutes later, an old, boxy car pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the twilight. An elderly man got out. He was tall and stooped, with a fringe of white hair and a face etched with weary kindness. He looked us up and down, taking in our garbage bag luggage and our tired faces. He didn't look surprised or judgmental. He just looked sad. "You're the kids," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Arthur Pendleton." He held out a thin, bony hand, and Maya shook it. "The ad is real?" she asked, her voice tight. "It is," he said, nodding slowly. "The terms of the trust are very specific. The property, the structure itself, mind you, not the land, is to be sold to the beneficiaries for the sum of $5. He looked at us over the top of his glasses. "Are you the beneficiaries?" I didn't understand. Beneficiaries of what? Maya, ever practical, simply nodded. "We are," she said, and she held out the $5 bill. Mr. Pendleton took it, his fingers brushing hers. He folded it once and put it in his pocket. Then he pulled out a single, heavy key. It was old, made of brass, with an ornate, almost floral head. "It's a quitclaim deed," he explained gently. "It transfers ownership of the diner building to you. The land is another matter. It's on a long-term lease, and that's complicated. But the building and everything in it is now yours." He handed the key to Maya. She took it, her hand closing around it as if it were a holy relic. He gave us a thin file of papers, the deed, told us to get it registered at the county clerk's office, and then he got back in his car. "Good luck, girls," he said, his voice soft, before driving away, leaving us alone in the dark with our ruin. For a long moment we just stood there, Maya clutching the key, me clutching the file. The reality of the situation was too enormous, too absurd to fully comprehend. We owned a building, a broken, useless, derelict building, but it was ours. Maya walked to the front door, her silhouette a dark shape against the grimy glass. She slid the heavy key into the lock. It resisted at first, stiff with disuse, but then, with a loud, grating clunk, The lock turned. She pushed the door open. A wave of air rolled out to meet us, thick and musty. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed for a very long time. The smell of dust, of decay, of trapped memories and stagnant air. It smelled like a tomb. We stepped inside, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. The darkness was absolute. Maya fumbled with her phone, turning on its flashlight. The thin beam cut through the gloom, revealing a scene frozen in time. We were standing in a classic 1970s diner. Red vinyl booths, their surfaces cracked and split, lined the walls. Chrome-legged stools stood like silent sentinels before a long formica countertop. Behind the counter, milkshake machines and coffee urns stood shrouded in a thick coat of dust. Sugar shakers and napkin dispensers were still on the tables, as if the customers had just vanished mid-meal. The air was so thick with dust that the flashlight beam looked solid, a tangible spear of light piercing the darkness. We walked deeper inside, the beam of light our only guide. The floor was a checkerboard of black and white tiles, now mostly gray with grime. Our feet crunched on debris, fallen plaster, dried leaves that had blown in through some crack. Something that might have been mouse droppings. It was overwhelming. The sheer scale of the neglect was staggering. Every surface was coated in filth. The kitchen, when we dared to peek inside, was even worse. Greasy residue covered the stainless steel, and the air was heavy with the rancid smell of old oil. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. This wasn't a project, it was an archaeological dig. It would take a miracle and more money than we could ever dream of to make this place habitable, let alone a functioning business. "Maya, we can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "Look at this place. It's a tear-down. We should have taken our chances in the city." Maya didn't answer. She was running her hand along the dusty countertop, her expression unreadable in the dim light. She seemed to be listening to the silence, to the ghosts of the place. She walked behind the counter, her light playing over the old-fashioned cash register, the order pads still stuck on a spike, the faded menu board on the wall. "Pie, $1.50, she read aloud. "Coffee, 50 cents. She knelt, her light scanning the area beneath the counter. "Leo, come here." I walked over, my shoes sticking slightly to the grimy floor. She was pointing the light at a small, dark object tucked away in a corner, almost completely obscured by shadows and cobwebs. It was a metal box, a heavy-duty cash box, painted black. It was locked. "Maybe there's something in there," she said, her voice filled with a desperate hope. "Keys to the back rooms? Paperwork? Anything." It seemed unlikely, but it was the first tangible object we'd found that wasn't covered in a uniform layer of filth. We carried it to one of the booths and set it on the table, the dust puffing up around it. It was heavy, solid. The lock was small but sturdy. We had no key. Maya looked around, then grabbed a heavy-duty butter knife from a tray on the counter. She wedged it into the seam and began to pry. For a minute, nothing happened. Then, with a loud shriek of protesting metal, the lock popped. We both held our breath as Maya slowly lifted the lid. I don't know what I was expecting. Old coins, maybe? A handful of moldy bills? But the box was empty of cash. All it held was a single, thick envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper. It was sealed with a circle of dark red wax, and on the front, in faded but elegant cursive, were 2 words: "My girls." My heart stopped. I recognized the handwriting. It was a ghost from my earliest memories, the loopy, graceful script from the 1 or 2 birthday cards I'd received as a very small child, before everything fell apart. It was my grandmother's handwriting. Her name was Eleanor, but we'd called her Nana L. She was our mother's mother. The story we'd been told was a simple, cruel one. After our grandfather died, she sold her house, took the money, and disappeared, abandoning our mother when she needed her most. My mom rarely spoke of her, and when she did, her voice was a brittle mix of anger and pain. We hadn't seen or heard from her since I was 5, and yet here was her handwriting, on an envelope hidden in a derelict diner in the middle of nowhere. Maya's hands were shaking as she carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was brittle with age. She held the phone over it, and I leaned in, reading the words over her shoulder. The letter began, "My dearest Maya and Leonora, if you are reading this, then the world has been as unkind to you as I feared it might be. And for that, I am more sorry than you will ever know." My eyes blurred with tears. Leonora. No one had called me that since she left. The letter went on to explain everything. This diner, the Starlight, had been her life's work, her and my grandfather's dream. When he died, she didn't run away. She got sick, a degenerative illness that she knew would eventually leave her unable to care for herself, let alone a teenage daughter. She didn't want our mother to waste her youth being a caregiver, so she made an impossible choice. She sold her house to create a trust fund for our mom, one that Mom never knew the true source of. And she put the diner into a separate, legally airtight trust managed by Mr. Pendleton, her young lawyer at the time. The trust had one very specific, very strange instruction. The diner was to be left vacant, untouched, until the day her granddaughters, if they ever came to exist, turned 18. If at that time they found themselves in need, the trustee was instructed to place a classified ad, and the diner was to be sold to them for the price she paid for the original front door key in 1972, $5. She didn't abandon us. She had been trying to protect us, to provide a final, desperate safety net across decades of silence. "She knew," Maya whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Somehow, she knew we'd end up in trouble." I couldn't speak. I sank onto the cracked vinyl of the booth, the letter shaking in my hand. The entire foundation of my childhood, the story of our family's brokenness, was a lie. It wasn't a story of abandonment. It was a story of a desperate, secret act of love. We weren't the granddaughters of a woman who ran away. We were the granddaughters of a woman who planned for the worst, who left us not a fortune, but a shelter. A $5 fortress against the world. The letter ended with a final, cryptic line. "The money is gone, I know. I had to use it for my care. But the real inheritance, the one that matters, is hidden where the heart of the diner beats strongest. Find it. Make this place a home again. It was always meant for you." We sat there for a long time, in the dusty, silent diner, the single beam of a dying phone light illuminating the words that had rewritten our entire lives. We cried. We cried for the grandmother we never knew, for the mother who had died feeling abandoned, for the lost years, and for the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful gift we had just been given. This ruin wasn't a ruin at all. It was an inheritance. It was a home waiting to be reclaimed. The emotional high of the discovery carried us through the next day. We woke up stiff and cold in the car, which we'd managed to push into the diner's parking lot. But instead of despair, The morning felt charged with purpose. The grimy windows and rusted chrome of the diner didn't look like a monument to decay anymore. They looked like a challenge. We were no longer two homeless kids. We were proprietors. We were heirs. Our first order of business was to make the place survivable. There was a small office and a storage room in the back. They were just as dusty as the main room, but they were small and contained. We found old tarps and blankets, stiff with age, and swept out a corner of the office. We spent our last $47 on cleaning supplies, buckets, and cheap foam sleeping pads at a dollar store in Havenwood. The town itself was small, a sleepy collection of buildings that looked like they hadn't changed much in 50 years. People watched us with a kind of slow, rural curiosity as we loaded our meager supplies into a shopping cart to wheel back to the diner. That night, we slept indoors for the first time since being kicked out. We slept on the floor of the diner's office, surrounded by the smell of lemon-scented cleaner and old paper. It was the best night's sleep I'd had in years. The next morning, Mr. Pendleton called. He sounded relieved to hear from us. "I need to be fully transparent with you girls," he said, his voice grave. I mentioned the land lease was complicated. I'm afraid complicated was an understatement. He explained the situation. The land beneath the diner was owned by a large property development corporation, RGS Holdings. They had bought up most of the cheap, undeveloped land along the old highway years ago. The lease my grandmother had signed was for 50 years, and it was set to expire in 6 months. RGS had no interest in having a diner on their property. They had plans for a gas station and a strip mall. They've been sending offers for years to buy out the structure and terminate the lease early, Mr. Pendleton said. The trust was legally obligated to refuse them. But now that you're the owners, the offer is extended to you. An offer? Maya asked, her voice cautious. How much? There was a pause. $10,000, he said. They'll pay you $10,000 for the building. You sign it over, and you walk away free and clear. $10,000. The number echoed in the small, dusty office. It felt like $1 million. It was more money than we had ever seen in our lives. It was enough for a security deposit on an apartment, a used car that actually ran, food, clothes. It was a ticket back to a normal life. It was a parachute. But what happens to the diner? I asked, my voice small. They'll demolish it, he said, his tone flat and matter-of-fact. It would be gone within a week. After the call ended, a heavy silence fell between us. The choice was a physical weight in the room. $10,000. It was the sensible option, the logical path. It was a clean break from the poverty and uncertainty that had defined our lives. We could take that money and disappear, start fresh somewhere new, leave the ghosts of our past and the dust of this diner behind us. Maya, my practical, pragmatic sister, was the one who voiced it. "We should take it, Leo," she said softly, not looking at me. She was staring out the office window at the peeling paint on the back wall. $10,000. We could get a place, a real place. We could get jobs. It's a way out. I knew she was right. Every rational part of my brain screamed that she was right. This diner was a fantasy, a money pit, a guaranteed failure. We had no experience, no capital, no idea what we were doing. We were trying to resurrect a corpse. Taking the money was the smart move. But my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I thought of our grandmother's letter. Make this place a home again. It was always meant for you. She hadn't left us a building to be sold for scrap. She had left us a legacy, a chance to put down roots. To sell it felt like a betrayal. It felt like we would be abandoning her, just as we once thought she had abandoned us. "It's not just a building, Maya," I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's all we have left of them, of her, of Mom. Don't you feel it? This place is important." "Important doesn't pay rent," she shot back, her voice sharp with stress. "Important doesn't buy groceries. I'm trying to be realistic, Leo. We're sleeping on the floor of a condemned building. We have no running water. A warm bed and a hot meal sound a lot more important to me right now than some ghost's dream." The fight was ugly. We yelled. We said things we didn't mean, words born of fear and exhaustion. I accused her of being heartless. She accused me of living in a fairy tale. It ended with both of us retreating to separate corners of the diner, the silence between us colder and heavier than the dust-filled air. I felt completely lost. Was I being a sentimental fool? Was Maya right? My head and my heart were at war, and I didn't know which to trust. Have you ever been faced with a choice like that? A choice where your head and your heart are screaming different things, pulling you in two opposite directions. It's in those moments, I think, that we find out who we really are. I spent the rest of the day wandering through the diner alone, running my hands over the cracked vinyl and dusty chrome. I was looking for an answer, a sign. I kept coming back to the last line of the letter. "The real inheritance is hidden where the heart of the diner beats strongest." What was the heart of a diner? The kitchen? The grill? The coffee pots? It sounded like a riddle. I went back behind the counter, my feet scuffing a familiar path. I stood where Maya had stood when she'd found the first letter. I thought about the flow of the place. The waitresses would come back here, spike the orders, pour the coffee, talk to the cook. This was the nerve center, the heart. I started looking more closely, running my hands over every surface, tapping on the wooden panels beneath the counter. Near the pass-through window to the kitchen, one of the floorboards felt different. It was a short board, right up against the wall. When I pressed on it, it gave slightly, with a faint squeak. My heart started to pound. I got my fingers under the edge and pulled. It was stuck fast. I ran to the kitchen and found an old, rusted crowbar. It took all my strength, but with a groan of splintering wood, the board came loose. And there, nestled in the dark, spider-webbed space beneath the floor, was another metal box. This one was bigger and heavier. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, my hands trembling. Inside, my breath caught in my throat. It was filled with stacks of cash, bundled in old paper bands. It wasn't a fortune, but it was far more than $10,000. I counted it later. It was $23,000, mostly in old soft 20s and 50s. But that wasn't all. Beneath the money was a large leather-bound ledger. I opened it. It was filled with my grandmother's elegant script. They were recipes. Starlight chili, Eleanor's mile-high apple pie, sunrise pancakes. It was the soul of the diner, written on paper. And under the ledger, there was a photo album. I opened it to the first page. It was a picture of a young, smiling woman with my mother's eyes, standing proudly in front of the brand-new diner. My grandmother. I turned the pages, my vision blurring. There were pictures of her and my grandfather, arms around each other. Pictures of a bustling, happy diner filled with customers. And then, a few pages in, I saw her. A teenage girl, with my sister's determined jaw and my messy hair, laughing as she slid a milkshake across the counter. It was our mother. She had worked here. She had grown up here. This was her home. Tucked into the back of the album was one last envelope. It held another letter from our grandmother and a sheaf of legal documents. The letter was short. "My girls," it read, "this money is your seed. It's enough to start if you're brave enough to try. The recipes are your heart. And these papers, these are your sword and shield. I tried to buy this land. The developer used every dirty trick to stop me. My lawyer said I had no recourse, but I never believed him. I hope you have better luck. This diner was a place of light for so many people. Don't let them put it out. Be brave. I love you." I took the box to Maya. I didn't say a word. I just opened it and laid the contents on the dusty booth table between us. She stared at the money, then picked up the recipe book, her fingers tracing the faded ink. She opened the photo album, and when she saw the picture of our mom, a small, broken sound escaped her lips. She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears. The fight was over. The choice was made. "Okay, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick. "Okay, let's be brave." The next morning, Maya called Mr. Pendleton. Her voice was clear and steady, without a trace of doubt. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, "my sister and I have discussed the offer from RGS Holdings. We are respectfully declining. We will not be selling our diner." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the old lawyer's surprise. "I see," he finally said, and for the first time, I heard a note of something like admiration in his voice. "Well, that is certainly your right. Things are about to get very difficult for you two." "We know," Maya said, looking at me with a small, determined smile. "We're ready." That phone call was the beginning of the war, but it was also the beginning of our lives. We had chosen the harder path, the one with no guarantees. We weren't just fixing a building anymore. We were fighting for our home. We were honoring a legacy. We were finally, after years of being passive victims of circumstance, taking control of our own story. The work was brutal. Every single day was a battle against decades of grime, decay, and neglect. We started with the cleaning. We filled bucket after bucket with black, greasy water, scrubbing every inch of the floors, the walls, the counters. We scraped, we scoured, we bleached. Our hands became raw, our nails permanently rimmed with dirt. Our muscles ached with a deep, satisfying pain. We were literally washing away the past, and with every clean patch of checkerboard tile we uncovered, it felt like we were reclaiming a piece of our future. We lived on peanut butter sandwiches and tap water from a friendly gas station down the road. The $23,000, which had seemed like a fortune, began to evaporate with terrifying speed. A plumber informed us that the entire system was shot. The pipes were corroded, the water heater a rust bucket. That was $3,000. An electrician took one look at the fuse box, a terrifying relic of cloth-wrapped wires, and told us the whole place needed to be rewired for safety. Another $5,000. The leak in the roof required a specialist. $2,000 more. Each new expense was a body blow, but we refused to be knocked out. We learned to be frugal, to be resourceful. We found a treasure trove of old, sturdy wooden tables and chairs in the storeroom, and we spent a week stripping and refinishing them ourselves, our arms burning from the effort. We taught ourselves how to patch drywall from YouTube videos. We became experts in haggling at the local hardware store. The owner, A gruff man named George, with a beard like steel wool, was initially suspicious of us, two city kids trying to play homesteader. But as he saw us coming back day after day, covered in paint and dust but still determined, his gruffness began to melt. He started giving us discounts, throwing in extra boxes of screws, offering gruff monosyllabic advice on the best way to fix a warped door frame. We started to become a part of the town's landscape. People would slow down as they drove past, staring at the slow-motion resurrection happening at the crossroads. An old trucker named Sal stopped by one afternoon. He was a mountain of a man with a kind, weathered face. "I remember this place," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Used to be the best damn pie for 100 miles. Eleanor, she was a hell of a baker." He told us stories about our grandmother, about how she'd give free meals to drivers who were down on their luck, how the diner was a beacon of light and warmth on long, lonely nights. He became our first regular, stopping by every few days with coffee and donuts, inspecting our progress and offering encouragement. Our home was still the sleeping pads on the office floor, but it was a home. We were exhausted, constantly stressed about money, but we were working together, a well-oiled machine. Maya, with her head for numbers, managed the budget, meticulously tracking every penny. I, the dreamer, focused on the vision, sketching out plans for the decor, poring over my grandmother's recipe book, imagining the smells and sounds of a full, bustling diner. Just as we were starting to feel a fragile sense of momentum, the developer showed up. A sleek black car pulled into our half-repaired lot, and a man in a suit that cost more than our plumbing stepped out. He was tall, with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name was Mr. Davies. "I'm from RGS Holdings," he said, his eyes scanning our work with a look of dismissive amusement. "I just wanted to personally follow up on our generous offer." "We already gave our answer," Maya said, her arms crossed, her stance defiant. "Ah, yes," he said with a condescending chuckle. "The 'we're not selling' answer. A noble, if foolish, sentiment. Look, kids, I get it. It's a cute project, but let's be realistic. You're in over your heads. This building is a wreck, and your lease is up in," he checked his gold watch, "4.5 months. We will not be renewing it. So your hard work is for nothing." He leaned against his car, the picture of casual power. "I'm authorized to make you a new offer, one time only. $30,000, cash. You can be on a beach somewhere next week instead of scrubbing grease traps." $30,000. It was a fortune. It was more than we had started with. It was enough to solve all our problems. For a split second, I saw Maya hesitate. I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the calculation. But then she looked at the half-painted sign, at the clean windows that now reflected the big country sky. She looked at me. "The answer is still no," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and strength I had never heard before. "This is our home. It's not for sale." Mr. Davies' smile vanished. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice cold. "I'll see to it that this property is flattened, one way or another." He got in his car and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. We stood there watching him go, the threat hanging in the air. We had won the battle, but we both knew the war was far from over. The weeks turned into months. Summer arrived, blanketing Havenwood in a thick, humid heat. The work on the diner continued, our progress slow but steady. The new wiring was in, the plumbing worked, and the roof was patched. We had light and, for the first time, running water. The feeling of taking a hot shower in the small bathroom we'd managed to rig up felt like the height of luxury. The interior was starting to look less like a ruin and more like a restaurant. We had painted the walls a warm, buttery yellow. The red vinyl of the booths, which we couldn't afford to replace, we had painstakingly repaired with special kits, their scars a testament to their history. The chrome, polished for hours, now offered a soft, distorted reflection of our tired but determined faces. The community, which had at first been watching from a distance, started to get involved. Sal, the trucker, organized a painting party one Saturday. A dozen people showed up: George from the hardware store, a few other local business owners, a family from a nearby farm. They came with rollers, brushes, and trays, and by the end of the day, the entire exterior of the diner had a fresh coat of bright white and cherry red paint. A woman named Mrs. Gable, who ran the local nursery, arrived with flats of flowers and helped us plant them in makeshift flower boxes we'd built from scrap wood. They didn't ask for anything in return. They just seemed to believe in what we were doing. They saw two kids fighting against a faceless corporation, and they chose a side. We weren't just the city kids anymore. We were Havenwood's kids. One evening, after a long day of sanding floors, I was sitting alone in one of the booths. The sun was setting, and the light streaming through the clean windows cast long shadows across the room. I had the photo album open in front of me. I kept coming back to the pictures of my mother. In them, she looked so young, so full of life and hope. She wasn't the tired, sad woman I remembered from the end of her life. She was a girl with a future. I realized, with a pang of grief and understanding, that this diner wasn't just my grandmother's legacy. It was my mother's, too. This was the home she had lost. Maybe the reason she could never put down roots, the reason she ended up with a man like Don, was because she'd been severed from this place, her anchor. And we, her daughters, had been carried back here by some strange tide of fate to reclaim it for all of them. The story of our family wasn't one of abandonment after all. It was a story of loss, of bad luck, of illness, and of desperate choices. My grandmother hadn't abandoned my mother. She had tried to set her free. My mother hadn't abandoned us. She had just gotten lost along the way. By rebuilding this diner, we weren't just building a business. We were rebuilding our family's story, reframing it from a tragedy into a tale of resilience. We were taking all the broken pieces and putting them together to make something new, something whole. Just as I was lost in these thoughts, the phone rang. It was Mr. Pendleton. "I have some news," he said, and the cautious optimism in his voice made my heart beat faster. "I took those old documents your grandmother left you to a friend of mine, a real shark who specializes in property law. He's been digging into RGS Holdings' title for the land." He paused for dramatic effect. He found something, a loophole, a flaw in the original survey from the 1950s. It's a long shot, a very long shot, but he thinks you have grounds to challenge their claim to this specific parcel. He thinks your grandmother's original attempt to buy it, which they blocked, might give you precedent as an aggrieved party. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but I understood the gist of it. We had a chance, a tiny sliver of a chance, but it was more than we'd had before. "The fight will be expensive," Mr. Pendleton warned. "RGS will throw an army of lawyers at you. It could take years." I looked around the diner, at the clean floors and the polished chrome, at the flower boxes blooming outside the windows. I thought of the people who had helped us, of Sal and George and Mrs. Gable. I thought of my grandmother's last letter. Be brave. We'll fight, I said, my voice clear and certain. We're not giving up. The legal battle loomed, a huge dark cloud on the horizon. But for the first time, it didn't seem insurmountable. We had the seed money, we had the community, and we had a story worth fighting for. The diner wasn't just a building on a disputed piece of land. It was our home, and we were ready to defend it. The last of the money went to Mr. Pendleton's lawyer friend as a retainer. We were broke again, but it felt different this time. It wasn't the desperate, hopeless poverty of our first days in the car. It was the purposeful, focused poverty of people investing in their own future. We had to open. We weren't ready, not by a long shot, but we had no choice. We needed to generate income. We decided on a soft opening. No big fanfare, no advertising. We'd just turn on the lights, unlock the door, and see what happened. We would serve a limited menu: coffee, donuts we bought from the bakery in town, and one other item. It has to be the pie, Maya said, her voice reverent as she held our grandmother's recipe book. Eleanor's mile-high apple pie. For 3 days we did nothing but bake. The kitchen, once a place of greasy horror, was now filled with the warm, heavenly scent of cinnamon, apples, and butter. I had never baked anything more complicated than a box cake in my life, but following my grandmother's precise, detailed instructions felt like she was right there with me, guiding my hands. We made mistakes. The first few crusts were burned, the filling too runny. But we kept at it, and by the morning of the opening, we had a dozen beautiful, golden brown pies cooling on the counter. The day of the opening was bright and clear. We flipped the closed sign to open and turned on the new neon starlight sign we'd had repaired. It hummed to life, casting a warm, buzzing glow. Then we waited. For an hour, nothing happened. The diner was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. I began to think we had made a terrible mistake. Maybe no one would come. Maybe the whole town thought we were a joke. Then the bell above the door chimed. It was Sal. He beamed at us, his large frame filling the doorway. "I smelled it from the highway," he boomed. "Give me a slice of that pie and a black coffee." He was our first customer. Soon after, Mrs. Gable came in, then George, then a few of the others who had helped with the painting. By noon, every stool at the counter was filled. The news had spread through the town's quiet grapevine. People weren't just coming for pie and coffee. They were coming to support us. They were coming to see the miracle on the old highway. Maya worked the counter, pouring coffee, her movements quick and efficient, a natural-born restaurateur. I cut and served the pie, my hands shaking slightly with every slice. The diner was filled with the murmur of conversations, the clinking of coffee cups, the sound of laughter. It was alive. The heart was beating again. Late that afternoon, a young family came in, a mom and dad with 2 small kids. They slid into the booth where I had found the second letter. The little boy pressed his face against the window, watching the cars go by. The little girl colored on a napkin. The parents drank their coffee, their shoulders relaxed, a look of quiet contentment on their faces. I watched them, and a profound sense of peace washed over me. This is what our grandmother had wanted. Not a monument, not a museum, but a living, breathing place. A place for families, for travelers, for lonely souls. A place of light and warmth. A home. By the end of the day, we had sold every last slice of pie. We had made $312. After we cleaned up and locked the door, Maya and I just stood in the middle of the quiet diner, the day's earnings clutched in a canvas bank bag. We were bone-tired, our faces smudged with flour and coffee, but we were both smiling. We hadn't just survived, we had succeeded. We looked at each other, and without a word, we knew we had done it. We had taken the worst day of our lives and turned it into the best thing that had ever happened to us. We had built a home out of the wreckage. Our story isn't over. The legal battle with RGS Holdings is still churning, a slow and expensive war of paperwork and motions. And this diner, our Starlight, still needs a lot more work. The menu is still small, and some days we barely make enough to cover our costs. It's not a fairy tale ending, not yet. It's something realer and maybe better. It's a beginning. We have a home. We have a purpose. We have a community that has our backs. We have each other. We found our grandmother's inheritance, and it wasn't the building or the money. It was the chance to discover our own strength, to reclaim our family's story, and to build a future on a foundation of love and resilience. If our story has meant anything to you, if it's reminded you that you can build a life, a home, a future out of what feels like nothing, then please subscribe and join our community here. This channel is for everyone who has ever had to start over. Share your own story of fighting for a second chance in the comments below. I read every single one, because I truly believe that every story of survival is a light in the dark, and we all need a little more light. Thank you for listening.